National Guard and a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Kinzinger is a leading voice on national security issues. He's also an advocate for working in a bipartisan manner when possible. If his name sounds familiar, it may be because he regularly bucks his own party. The six-term House conservative from Illinois was among 10 Republican lawmakers who voted to impeach President Donald Trump on January 13th. In November 2020, Kinzinger had voted for the president's re-election, but Trump lost the lawmakers' support by spinning election conspiracy theories that fueled the January 6th attack on the US Capitol by Trump supporters. Kinzinger tweeted at the time, quote, "It was a sobering moment to vote in support of impeachment today. To walk over to the US Capitol, our symbol of democracy, and recall the violent insurrection we witnessed here just 1 week ago. This is not a vote I took lightly, but a vote I took confidently. I'm at peace." He told The Atlantic he earned a registered letter from a relative after that vote, telling the born-again Christian that he was doing the devil's work and was possessed by demons for turning against Trump. Kinzinger said the letter illustrated a disturbing blending of evangelical Christianity and Republican politics, where support for conservative policies is used to determine whether someone is a true Christian. Although a critic of the president, Kinzinger backed some of Trump's national security and border security policies. He defended Trump's decision in 2019 to declare a national emergency along the border with Mexico. He cited drug and human smuggling along the border as concerns. He's closely watching President Biden and has criticized the announced US withdrawal from Afghanistan as potentially dangerous. He and a bipartisan group of lawmakers are also urging Biden to apply congressionally approved sanctions against Nord Stream 2, the natural gas pipeline opponents say will give Russia's Putin political leverage over Europe. We are looking forward today to a robust discussion of these issues. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Kinzinger.
Thank you. Good to be with you. Appreciate it. I guess I'm just give some opening remarks here. Thank you, Emily, and thanks everybody for being on board. Look, I won't talk about too much because I want to spend some time on your questions. But let me just say a couple of big things. This country, and particularly, I'll be speaking about the party because as a member of the party, I think I'm pretty well qualified to speak on it. Is in a pretty bad place, and my long game is optimism. I think that America always comes out on top. We've never, through history, even through really difficult times, we've never basically failed the next generation. We've always found our way through. It's that old saying that, Americans can be counted on to do the right thing when they've exhausted all other options. But what that means is we have to be clear-eyed about where we are. Let me tell you where we are as a party really quickly. Look, as a Republican Party, I was a weird kid that actually started paying attention to politics at like 6 years old. I was more into the yard science than I was policy. But anyway, I became, a Republican. My parents were. I kind of fell in love, I guess, with Republican politics, what it stood for. I appreciated and recognized the optimism of Ronald Reagan, and I consider one of the better even political leaders that you will ever hear from this century came out of the Republican Party, a number of them, if you think about it. So I looked at all that and, policies I believe in. And I'll tell you, since I got elected in 2010, what I've started to see was a party that stuck to its policies, but began to be infected by, in essence, really kind of grievance-driven politics. So it'll mask itself as conservatism. The truth is, I'm way more conservative than probably some of my folks out there that think I'm a rhino, which means Republican in name only, which is ironic since I was a Republican before Donald Trump was at 43 years old only. But it's interesting because what I think has happened in the Republican Party is policy has been replaced by personal grievance and by culture war. And culture war is really motivating, right? When you get angry about the wokeism, you get angry about cancel culture, you get angry about, what they're teaching in schools and all this kind of stuff. It really can overtake you that all you want to do is just destroy the other side of the aisle. And that's what the problem is leaders for the last 10 years have learned that fear and conspiracy drives profits and it drives votes. Fear is the most compelling human emotion. And so if you stand up and you make people fear If you say that Nancy Pelosi is going to destroy this country, or the left is going to, destroy your children, or this happens even on the left about the right, it is a very compelling emotion. The problem is it destroys democracies. And I think that's what we saw on January 6th. So I'm a pilot, a stall is what happens when you run out of flying airspeed and you fall out of the sky. But on every aircraft, just before you stall, it buffets. It's like a natural airframe shake to let you know, unintentionally, frankly, that you're about to fall out of the sky. And that's what January 6th was. It was a buffet. And I was very disappointed when my party's leaders, Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise in particular, decided that winning the next election and winning the majority was more important than a clear-eyed recognition of what happened on January 6th. What happened on January 6th was that a lie led to violence. Look, if you look at the people that attacked the Capitol, if you truly believe that the election was stolen, so just for a moment, suspend everything you believe and just think, okay, I truly believe the election was stolen. And you believe that it is Satanist pedophiles that run the government, which is what QAnon says. January 6th is not that crazy then, being as how that's what you really believe. And we've had leaders in our party, Donald Trump, members of Congress, that have convinced their base, because it's more easier to do that than to tell them the truth, which is that 74 million people were not disenfranchised, they were outnumbered. It's easier to placate them. And we have convinced many, many Americans wrongfully, we've abused them and convinced them the election was stolen. So January 6th shouldn't be a surprise. I tweeted this morning, and I've said it before, but it's getting a little more attention now. I was on a phone call with Kevin McCarthy and the Republican conference a couple days prior to January 6th. And I had said on a few media outlets that I was very concerned about violence on the 6th, because I looked at Twitter. I saw the threats against me. And I said, Kevin, with all this basically BS we're saying about we can make sure the election isn't certified, it was stolen, et cetera. I go, I really, really am concerned about violence on January 6th. The response I got was basically that cricket sound, and then, okay, Adam, operator, next caller. That's fine. I did as best I could. So that's, look, this party is in a bad place. We've got a lot of work to do. I am committed to one thing, to telling people the truth. That's why I started this Country First movement, which is just about saying truth over conspiracy. That's why I think when people talk about unity in the Republican Party, we can't wash over what happened on January 6th in the election, because truth and lies cannot coexist. They simply can't coexist. So it's a fight for the soul of the Republican Party. And to some of my friends and colleagues, I'm sorry it's in the public, but it's the public that make the votes. It's the public that determines who is going to lead the Republican Party. So with that, Emily, look, thank you for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions. Just wanted to hit that kind of briefly, and then, obviously be willing to answer any questions people bring up.
Absolutely. And just a reminder, if you'd like to submit a question, just email that to headliners@press.org. Congressman, thank you again for being on with us. And you actually sort of touched a little bit on the first thing I wanted to ask you about, which was that tweet that you sent out about an hour ago talking about Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy's response when you brought up the question about January 6th. And my question is, why did you decide to tweet that today? Who do you hope reads that tweet, and what message do you hope they take away from it?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've talked about this before in public, but I don't know if it's the timing, if it's the forum, whatever. Today seems to be getting a little more attention, probably because we're on the edge of, Kevin McCarthy trying to depose Liz Cheney. But I think what's important is, when we're out there, when Liz Cheney and people like me and, and others are out there saying, this is a real concern, guys. If we just wash this over, we act like January 6th really was Antifa and BLM, wink, wink. Listen to those of us that predicted what was going to happen on the 6th, because what we're predicting is going to happen right now. If we continue to lie to our voters, it's the complete and utter destruction of the Republican Party. And I think it's important to get out there. Look, it's the interesting thing is Liz is being chased out for one thing, not for going after the president. Look, she doesn't proactively go after the president, but she has conference chair. She has asked questions. She's responsible for she's being run out for one thing, her consistency. She said the same exact thing that Kevin McCarthy said on January 6th, which is Donald Trump is responsible. Side note, I don't think Scalise, I think he just stayed dog quiet. I don't know if he ever spoke about this in his entire life. So what happens is Kevin McCarthy goes only on certain press elements that are never going to ask him about this, which, by the way, when you talk about trying to win a broad coalition and win the majority again, and all you're doing, if you're Elise Stefanik, for instance, is going on Steve Bannon's show, like, why aren't you out there on non-traditional Republican areas? Because that's the people you're supposed to be reaching to. It's because they're not qualified, honestly. It's because all they do is they want to go kind of stir up the base. So when it came to Kevin, the only thing Liz did was be consistent. She refused to change because 2 weeks after, and it pains me to say this because I had considered Kevin McCarthy a great friend. But 2 weeks after January 6th, he goes down to Mar-a-Lago, and it was almost like January 6th never happened. We wink and nod at the BLM. Maybe it was Antifa. It's not really our fault. Let's just move on. Gosh, that was a whole 4 months ago. Let's just move on. And I think it's important for people to know the truth, which is this was entirely predictable and it was disregarded. I don't know if Kevin 2 days prior, I'm not saying he could have done anything to stop it necessarily. I don't know, but I know that it was seeable by me and I think others.
Got it. And I do want to take a step back. I imagine most people who are watching this right now, they understand what's about to happen 2 days from now on Wednesday. But just a quick recap, on Wednesday, the House Republican Conference, they're going to meet and they were expected to vote to remove Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who is the caucus chair, the number 3 Republican in the House, from her position. And that is because again and again, Congresswoman Cheney has come and pushed back against Trump when Trump claims that the 2020 election, that he should have won it and that it was rigged. Cheney has been a very loud voice. Cheney is, as well as yourself, Congressman, in pushing back against that, saying, no, that's not true. Even though Liz Cheney is very conservative, she's actually likely to be replaced by Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who voting-wise has a more moderate record, but who has been a very vocal supporter of President Trump. And so, Congressman, I want to sort of loop back and ask you, there was a very similar vote on Cheney that was taken back in February, and she won that with 2/3 of the support from the Republican conference. What has changed in those last 2 months? When you speak to your colleagues, what's the reason they give you for why they want to remove Cheney from her current post?
Because Cheney is making it uncomfortable for them. If you want to hide because you don't want to tick off the base and tell the truth about January 6th, you don't want to have to admit that Joe Biden won an election, Cheney makes it uncomfortable for you, because when she's asked about it, she doesn't dance around. She just says the election wasn't stolen. Biden was president, right? And January 6th was a Trump-inspired insurrection. And so that now gins up your local media again. You're going to have to answer that. And she's made it uncomfortable. And it's a really compelling argument to say, as a party, we just have to move on. We have to unite, right? But this is 4 months ago. And it's not like we have a disagreement in policy. It's not like we're sitting here, one side's arguing the top tax rate should be 32, the other's 31. And we just need to move on, like unite and move on. This is lies versus truth. This is the election was stolen, and therefore 1/3 of America believes that democracy fails. And that leads to violence, by the way, in the long term, versus the truth. It's amazing how many of my colleagues claim to likewise be Christians, but somehow are okay with like just accepting and supporting these lies. Because when I went to Sunday school, it was always about tell the truth. And I read nothing in the words of the New Testament about that you can lie as long as the end state's right, as long as it's against abortion or against the left. And so, look, I think when it comes down to it, that's Liz Cheney's, what she is being removed for is making it uncomfortable and being consistent. And God bless her for having the consistency to tell the truth, because history, I'm going to tell you in the long term, is going to write very well about her. And people are going to have to stand up and do the right thing. The last thing I'll say is this, is the one person continually bringing all this back up is not Liz Cheney, it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump was out of power after January 6th. And then Kevin McCarthy went down, probably with Scalise, and put the paddles on him and resurrected him politically back to life. And then he's the one that tweets something yesterday about horse doping. And then, all this weird stuff, I didn't tweet anymore, I guess, sends out a press release. He's the one that keeps talking about the big lie, the stolen election. He's the one that isn't unifying. But of course, he's out of power. He's a loser, but he's the one that a lot of people fear.
Mhm. I'm wondering also why you sort of think that is. I mean, there was looking at a poll the other day by Reuters and Ipsos that showed that 81% of Republicans still view President Trump favorably. And I know that obviously there have been many other polls showing his prominence within your party. I mean, at the end of the day, lawmakers to a certain extent are responding to their constituents. Why do you think are so many constituents still very loyal to Trump?
It's like it's a delicate dance. So on the one hand, we as lawmakers respond to our constituents, but we also have to lead. Otherwise, if you're literally just chasing public opinion and public opinion is following leaders who are chasing public opinion, you're literally a dog chasing your tail, and you end up out in traffic. To some extent, you can still like kind of look at your tail and kind of wonder where it's at, but you still have to, walk your body to certain places. And that's the role of leadership. And I think part of the reason is, first off, you see within those numbers of republicanism, there is a softening of like hardcore support, and there's a bit of a shift in terms of people that support the party over Donald Trump. But a couple things. Number one, it's just going to take some time. I think it took, a number of years for Donald Trump to get this hold. It'll take a number of years for him to lose hold like this. But the other thing is because leaders aren't telling people the truth. They're just not standing in front and saying, look, ladies and gentlemen, the Republican Party existed before Trump and it'll exist after Trump. We have great candidates that can be president. It doesn't have to be Trump. I had a very revealing thing in Vegas. So I was there with the military and my wife and I were standing, outside of a bar, probably at like 2:00. We were off for the day. And, but somebody came up to me and she recognized me and her husband. And she said, well, this was right after the election. And she's like, gee, I hope Trump wins. And I go, well, he obviously lost. And she goes, well, at least he'll run in 2024. And I said, no, he won't. She goes, well, then at least Don Jr. will. And I go, well, no, Don Jr. is not going to run in 2024. And she was just, what? Then how are we ever going to win again? And I think it's important for Republicans to remind their constituents that we won before Trump. And Trump actually is the reason that we lost the House, the Senate, and the presidency. We'll win again. And but I think that's part of the reason. But, look, at the end of the day, too, I just don't know. I know I can fight hard for the soul of the party. I know it's important for us to hear the voice of those that basically supported Trump because they felt left behind. But instead of inspiring them with fear, we need to inspire them with optimism. But ultimately, that decision will be made, and I'm just one part of that, and we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you've talked about a little bit about winning here and the elections. So I actually want to go to one that happened recently that you were involved in. This is in Texas's 6th district. There was a special election held there because Congressman, unfortunately, Ron White died from coronavirus. Congressman, there was a crowded field, 23 individuals, Democrats and Republicans. You backed the anti-Trump candidate, Michael Wood, as well as Congressman Cheney also came out and backed him. He wound up getting 9th place in that election with 3% of the vote. And a number of people I've talked to, they've interpreted that to show that Republican voters are more aligned with Trump than ever. Is that your takeaway from this special election?
It's interesting. So obviously a special is unique. My takeaway from that is certainly Trump, Republican voters are more aligned with Trump now than not Trump. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I do point out that Donald Trump endorsed the widow of Ron White, Susan Wright, who, I'm looking forward to serving with if she wins. I have nothing against her at all. He endorsed her 5 days before the election when half the votes were already cast and she was ahead in the polls. So that's not a courageous endorsement from Donald Trump. And in fact, if you talk to anybody that knows Trump, they'll tell you he's scared to death right now. He's only taking safe endorsements because he's worried that if he loses something, people will see him for what he is, a paper tiger. In terms of the Michael Wood thing, look, I knew that was going to be a long shot. But my view on with Country First, what I want to do and with who I support is not to sit back and just find races that we know can win and then support those people, because then all that becomes is me doing things to promote myself. And maybe people are just so cynical in politics, but I'm truly not doing this to promote Adam Kinzinger. It's because it's actually something I care about. I've dedicated my life to this country and this party. And so for me, it was important to show that if you're willing to stand up and tell people the truth, there are people that will support you, and it may not be enough to win, and it may not be enough to compete. It may be David and Goliath fight, but there are people, and that's what a movement grows from. And lastly, Michael Wood, without his honest truth telling, without the involvement of Country First in my campaign, most people wouldn't have heard of him. And he got a huge forum to talk to millions and millions of people and tell the truth. So that to me was a win and a success. And I hope he feels that way as well.
With Country First, I know that you're also, as you just sort of alluded to, looking for other candidates to back. I know that we're still really early in the 2022 cycle. I know it's particularly difficult this year because we don't yet know what district lines are going to look like. But I'm wondering, as you've gone out, as you've talked with people, has it been, how easy is it to find potential candidates? Is there a lot of interest in running, or are people a little hesitant right now to run with an R next to their name?
Yeah, I guess it's a cheap answer. It depends who you ask, right? I think there are a lot of people that feel so compelled to save the party that they're willing to put it all on the line. And Michael Wood was a huge inspiration for a lot of people in that. I mean, the guy, his story is a Marine, wounded in Iraq and, came back, says the truth. But there are also a number of people, and this is where the party has to take real inventory, that used to be Republicans that now either consider themselves an independent or like Red Dog Democrats, because they just believe the party's going to go on and on and on off the rails. And it's interesting. Everybody talks about the new base voter that Trump gained over here. But what they don't talk about is these voters lost, right? The suburbs. It's the whole reason why I'm the last Republican north of central Illinois, in Illinois, when it used to be Republican all north of me, because we lost suburban voters. So yes, I'm hearing a lot of interest. We are still early in the process. But there's also a number of people that are just kind of like, I'm not going to fight this fight. And that's a sad thing.
I mean, when you hear from those people who say, I'm not going to fight this fight, what's their reason for not doing so?
I think it's the feeling, look, power, the only thing power is what people perceive it to be. There's no the only power anybody actually has at their core is their physical strength, right? If you can beat somebody up, you have power over them. But any other power that society grants on you, or in politics or anything, it's all what either people as a community agree that you have or what they perceive you have. And that's the case with Donald Trump. The perception is that Donald Trump is a very powerful person. And if you believe he's powerful, he is. The truth is, I think he's a paper tiger. I think he's never made a real decision in his life, and I think he's scared to death of his own shadow. But I think that's part of the reason people are like, is they just see Donald Trump as this powerful figure with a powerful movement. And, maybe they're right. I just don't think they are.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when it comes to individuals seeing Trump as a powerful person, I'm wondering a little bit how your colleagues see it. I mean, you speak with them in the House. How many of them really believe that Trump won the 2020 election and that things were rigged against him? And how many of them are just going along with it because, as you sort of mentioned, they might be worried about political consequences?
I truly, truly, Emily, believe that maybe 10 of my fellow colleagues in the House believe that the election was stolen. Maybe 10. And I say that because I'm putting room in there are probably just some people that are not really all that, high IQ-ish on some things, I guess. I think a lot of members on my side that will go and kind of play the election was stolen thing. It's because they know better, but they also that's how they win. And look, it's not an irrational thing for them to do. I'm not attacking them because look, if your passion is, for instance, healthcare policy, and that's why you got into Congress, or like mine is foreign policy, and you say, if I come out and say that the election was legit, I will lose my primary in some areas. And you say, well, what good is that for the cause I believe in to lose my primary on something I can't make a difference on, and then taking myself out of the fight for the things I can? And so you make that decision. I'm going to just kind of at least go along with this so I can be here to fight the bigger fight. I get it and I understand it. And honestly, I don't blame people that take that view. Just for me, it's been enough. I've been in long enough This is my 11th year that I have watched us compromise with crazy basically every 2 years. And all that becomes is the starting position for the next iteration towards crazy. And this party's a little off the rails now.
Mm-hmm. I also want to go back because I know you've said in the past that one of the reasons that people believe the election was rigged is because many Republican leaders have sort of upheld that lie and continue to repeat it. But I also want to point out that a number of people, including Mitch McConnell, former Attorney General William Barr, they've come out and said that there wasn't any fraud in the election and that Biden is really the president. And I'm wondering what more might be needed to be done to really counter this quote unquote big lie.
So I would love to see the Republican Party actually commission, I guess we'll do it like this. I haven't put much thought into this, so maybe it may be kind of a dumb procedure, but in essence, commission a study to say, we're going to determine if the election was stolen or not. And we're going to have a report out in a month with all the evidence to prove that it was or wasn't. And I mean, obviously, if it's an honest report, it'll prove that it wasn't.
I mean, didn't Barr kind of already do that though? The Trump,
I guess,
the Justice Department under Trump already looked into it, and we already got a conclusion.
Yeah, that's why I wish that it would be like the party with Kevin and leadership, because you can look at Barr and it's fine, and then Tucker goes on at night and tries to discredit all of that. I mean, look, I'm an example. Having been on, I did one of Tucker's very first shows where he basically tried to ridicule me for believing that the Russians had anything to do with the 2016 election. Of course, we now know they do, but this is what he can constantly change his position. And nobody remembers what he said the night before, because he could say, like, I think we should stay in Afghanistan one night. The next night, we need to leave Afghanistan. Remember, he used to be a huge, supporter of that war. Now he's not. And last night never happened. And so that's what happens on these kinds of things. It'll be, hey, what about this 30,000 ballot dump that happened in Michigan? Well, okay, now the truth comes out, it was an uploading thing, whatever. And then that never existed. Now it's on to the next conspiracy theory. And unfortunately, that's what people believe. I mean, look, I had one very sane person tell me, who's on the county board in the county I'm in right now that I live in, that said, yeah, I get all your evidence, Adam, and I believe you believe it. I'm going to tell you what I believe. There is no way, with all the people I know, I don't know anybody that voted for Biden, and there's no way that 74 million people were outnumbered. I just know that. Well, okay. I mean, I can't argue with, I just know that. But I'm going to tell you it ain't true. Even if you don't know any Biden supporters, they're out there.
Got it. We're also getting a couple good questions in. So I want to give you one from Dana Milbank with the Washington Post. A couple good ones actually here, but I'll start with the first one. Can the Republican Party be saved as long as Kevin McCarthy is the leader of the House Republicans?
Thanks, Dana. I think so. Because he basically made the decision when he went to Mar-a-Lago that he was not going to be the leader of the Republican Party. He had the opportunity after January 6th to, like with Mitch McConnell, basically take the reins of the Republican Party and be the leader. And he handed those reins over to Trump and revived him. So I don't consider what he does, yes, it's certainly far more impactful than what I do, but I don't consider him to be speaking on behalf of the Republican Party anymore, because he gave his voting card, he gave his proxy card to Donald Trump. So do I think it can be saved? Yeah. But I think that's going to happen by, frankly, me and my colleagues saying, we're going to, kind of like from the grassroots changing this. Look, it's interesting because I actually thought the person that should have their leadership challenge was Kevin McCarthy after January 6th, because that's why this all happened. And the Freedom Club and, some of those folks went on offense against Liz, and it was probably a really brilliant strategic play, because all of a sudden she's on the defense. And to her credit and to others' credit, I was considering, having a vote of no confidence against Kevin. And our feeling was, no, let's move on. We're going to vote to impeach the president. We need to move on. And then it was them that came back after Liz, not because Liz is any real threat to them, except to make them feel uncomfortable.
It's really interesting. I mean, were there a number of your colleagues when you spoke about potentially challenging Kevin McCarthy's leadership? What was the response you got from your colleagues there?
I didn't go too far and wide with it yet. and I chatted with kind of a close group of mine. And the feeling in that close group, I won't reveal who it is, but the feeling in that group was kind of, look, we're taking a big step. The president's going to be XYZ, and now it's time that we have to heal as a party. All right. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to do it alone. I still believe that Kevin should at least have his leadership challenged. And then everybody went on the offense against Liz. And that's what was brilliant. It was a brilliant strategic play, because then all of a sudden, Liz is the one playing defense for what? What's she playing defense for? Telling the truth and not ransacking the Capitol on January 6th? I mean, if you think about it from the forest, it's ludicrous that she's having to defend herself. Like, that's insane. But that's where we are.
I could get into that a little bit more, but I also want to make sure that I'm using our time wisely. We've got 15 minutes left, and I want to be respectful of you while you're here. I mean, you were asked on CBS's Face the Nation yesterday why you don't just leave the Republican Party, and you said that you wanted to fight for it. But I am wondering how much of a battle there is at this point. You've now been censured twice by Republican groups in Illinois. Of the 10 House lawmakers who voted to impeach Trump, 8 have now been censured by Republicans. I mean, at this point, what does victory look like for you? What you said that you're fighting, what does a victory look like?
It's a day by, I can't answer that, because I mean, obviously a great victory, like kind of, VE Day would be Donald Trump apologizes for everything he's ever done. And, Liz is promoted to speaker and whatever, but that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. I don't know. It's a day by day approach, right? I had said initially that by this summer, we're going to have a good indication of where the party's going. We're not quite there yet, but we're starting to see, signs of the party is going more and more Trump. And that could change. It may not. And so for me, it's a day by day battle. But here's what I do know is, like, Donald Trump became a Republican when I was probably in Iraq, right? And I was one far before that. So I'm certainly not in any easy way going to walk away and give him over this without a fight.
So what do you think the future then of the Republican Party is going to be? Like, if you had to predict now, you just mentioned that it does seem to be moving more towards Trump. I think the vote on Wednesday is a huge marker of that. Spell that out then. If the Republican Party moves more towards Trump, then what?
If it moves more towards Trump, then in the near term, I think we still may win the majority, but I think that gets threatened. I think the crazies, and when I say crazies, I don't mean the true believers. I'm kind of talking about the ones that are just like grifters, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, just doing it for money and fame. They'll be emboldened. I think, though, ultimately, I mean, I would put all of my money on, at some point in the future, the party will kind of like return to its roots, because it has to, or it's going to die. I mean, it's one of the two. It will either return to its roots or die. But there will always, parties have to represent half the country. So it will naturally kind of, move around a little bit. I just don't know when that's going to be. And I certainly hope that there's not a ton of damage done in the meantime. Look, I don't agree with a lot of the policies of the left, obviously, right? I'm voting against, certain policies that come before us in the House. But I think the biggest battle, it's always funny when I vote when I vote as a conservative, and you see all the, the Twitter comments about, oh, we had hopes for him and he's just a conservative. Yeah, I'm a conservative. Like, I didn't change what I believe. What I'm saying is that the big issue right now is how we respect and talk to each other. So we'll see what happens with the party, but I think eventually it has to correct. And if it doesn't, it will be destroyed and something will replace it, sometime into the future.
I'm wondering, do you think there is a message out there for Republicans that can unite those who are strong supporters of Trump's, as well as those who college educated, live in the suburbs, have conservative values, but do not like Trump at all?
So I think, number one, we have to reckon with what happened January 6th, because that was 4 months ago, and it was so bad. It's not the riots over the summer, right? I condemn the riots over the summer. In fact, I worked them as a guardsman. But that is far different than what happened on January 6th, because those riots over the summer were based on an issue, but they didn't threaten to topple democracy. This did. I mean, if you think of how much we spend to secure the vice president And now you had the second, third, and fourth within striking distance of a mob that wanted to kill him. And then we want to whistle Dixie and walk on a straight line and pretend like that was so long. You're still talking about January 6th. I mean, move on, gosh, right? Like, so I think what needs to happen is we have to come to a full reckoning of that. And then
Can I interject quickly?
Yeah.
What does a full reckoning look like? Does it look like all the congressional Republicans in a room taking a vote, come out with a statement at the end of it? Like what, in a sense, you are reckoning with it right now with this vote that's coming up on Congresswoman Cheney, right? What kind of reckoning are you looking for?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what that looks like, except that we just basically, as a party and people, admit it was our fault, and here's how we're going to prevent that in the future. We're going to quit peddling conspiracies. We're going to quit lying, stuff like that. And so that to me is number one. And the other thing is, what do we believe? Like, as a conservative, we argue about all these little details. I just believe that a kid born 30 miles north of where I'm at right now, so a kid born in, south side of Chicago, should have the same opportunity as a kid born in Alexandria, Virginia. That's what conservatism is. And that kid also has the same challenge as somebody in the rural town does. And we want to fix that, right? That's how we can unite, but you cannot unite with lies. If somebody is going to use lies to gain power and say, let's have unity, it's incongruent. You can't do it.
Got it. So for all of your colleagues out there who are saying we need to move Liz Cheney because of unity purposes, it's that there's no point in having a unity if the thing you're unifying behind isn't accurate.
We need to remove Liz Cheney because she makes me have to answer questions that I know are false. That's what they're saying. And it's like, it's incredible, right? The only person, by the way, bringing up the election over and over again is not Liz, it's Donald Trump. So they're not making any moves on him.
I know I feel like we could keep talking about the future of the Republican Party all day. I do want to touch on a couple other very newsy topics that I'd love to get your insights on. I wanted to ask you about one of the major headlines today, the continued shutdown of the Colonial Pipeline, responsible for carrying 45% of the East Coast fuel supplies. That it was shut down because it was a target of a cyber attack. You sit on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Are you surprised that hackers were able to accomplish this? And what role, if any, might Congress have in preventing future attacks like this one?
I'm not surprised. And, this is something we've been talking about, real infrastructure being targeted. I'm seeing indications that may be Russian connected, which is zero surprise.
Yeah, Bloomberg reporting Russia or Eastern Europe at this point.
So if it is, look, I'll say a couple things. So what's Congress's role? Two things. Number one, we have to spend the money to secure critical infrastructure. We've got to get better at allowing information sharing between private companies and the federal government. That's when your Rand Paul types get all stirred up and agitated when you talk about the federal government and private companies sharing information. Well, the truth is they need to, because sometimes private companies see threats before the government does. Usually the government sees threats before private companies do. And I think the other thing is we need a policy of, for lack of a better term, mutual assured destruction. It's what happened in the days of nuclear weapons. It's terrible, this idea that, if Russia nukes us, we'll nuke them, so it's not worth it. So we don't. It worked. But that's kind of what you're seeing on infrastructure and cyber issues right now, is these devastating attacks can happen, like SolarWinds, who we don't even begin to understand the impact of that yet on our country. And I think we have to put these countries that are behind this at the same level of in essence, vulnerability and threat that they put us in. And trust me, we have the ability to do it. And the last thing I'll say on that is, this is the right time for Joe Biden and the administration to do the congressionally mandated sanctions on Nord Stream 2 and end it once and for all. The Democrats were really, really good at attacking President Trump for not implementing congressionally mandated sanctions. Guess what? There are congressionally mandated sanctions against Nord Stream 2 that the for whatever reason the State Department's slow walking. And I have my theories, but anyway.
Got it. I also want to talk a bit about we're mentioning infrastructure now with the pipeline, the infrastructure package that President Biden has put forward. Have you gotten the impression from your Democratic colleagues that they're interested in working with you to find some bipartisan solution on at least the infrastructure part of the package? And do you have a sense from the Republicans in your party that they would be interested in working with Democrats on this? going forward?
The first question, no, I have not got any indication that Democrats want to work with us. I've never had outreach from anybody in the administration on any of these issues, and fine, right? I mean, I get it, but I think there are a number of us that would be willing to work with the administration. Now, what we got to do is, if we're talking infrastructure, let's do infrastructure. Let's not do human infrastructure and all this kind of fancy stuff. Let's stick to infrastructure. If there's something that is, HHS related, just be honest about it. Let's have a debate in a separate bill on that. And I saw today that I think McConnell said he was open to 800 or 900 billion. The one thing I want to do too is fix the system forever. So I want better funding mechanisms that may mean a gas tax increase or whatever is included for funding, so that we're not just going through this every couple of years where we can't talk to each other. We actually fix the system for the next generation. And but I will say I do have real concerns now after the last, COVID expenditure bill and what we're seeing on the inflation front, that the time may not be right for infrastructure now, because we have extremely high cost of materials and we have really high inflationary pressures. But I certainly want to do it, so we'll see.
Got it. We also have a question from Reuters, which I really like this one. Without mentioning Trump, take him totally out of the equation, what do you believe is a winning policy position or positions for Republicans heading into 2022?
I think, heading into 2022 as the opposition party, it tends to be more of an opposition message. So I think it's pushing back against, to an extent, some of the breach or the creep of government programs. I think, this unemployment report was huge yesterday, because it does show what we believe, which is that these continued unemployment benefits are actually, I've talked to 100 people and everybody has that say, I'm trying to call people back to work, and they say they're not lazy, they're just going to make less money if they come back to work. And it was the same thing we confronted in 2012 after the Great Recession on that. So I think talking about those issues, and then I really think the number one kind of long-term focus for us as a party needs to be modernizing government to the 21st century, government and policies and taxation. But on government side, the federal government looks exactly like it did in the 1900s and the 1800s. Why is it that the Department of Health and Human Services is in DC? Maybe that could be somewhere else. Couldn't the Department of Agriculture be in Iowa or Illinois? How can we modernize government? And I think if we actually put real thoughts and message into that, it can be winning as well.
Got it. Well, I know that we are coming up on 11:45, but before I ask the final question, I just want to take a moment to thank the organizers of today's event, headliners, co-team leaders, Donna Lewan and Lori Russo, today headliner event coordinators, Joyce Feinstein and Ellen Ferguson, Club Communications Director Lindsay Underwood, and Club Executive Director Bill McCarran. I'd also like to tell you very quickly about one upcoming NPC event. This afternoon, we're going to be hearing from Don Lemon, host of CNN Tonight with Don Lemon, who will discuss his new book, This is Fire, What I Say to My Friends About Racism. That's at 2 p.m., and I hope that you guys will be joining us for that. Congressman, I was going to ask some sort of broad, wide-ranging question, but given your experience in the military, I would be remiss if I did not briefly ask you about Afghanistan. We heard the news this past weekend of the bombing outside an Afghanistan girls' school that's killed 50. And I wanted to see, when you heard that news, do you think that that is a result of the U.S. plan to withdraw troops? And is that a good enough reason for the U.S. to continue to stay in the area?
Yeah, I think it's a result of very evil people with very evil intentions, but I do think the U.S. plan to withdraw is encouraging it. The Taliban always had the saying, America has the watches, but we have the time. They were willing to put the patience in, they knew that we wouldn't. I've been really impressed, actually, at the American people's patience for 20 years of this war. I've never once seen a protest in D.C. against troops in Afghanistan, yet somehow in the political class, there was this perception that we just have to leave, the Rand Paul endless war garbage he talks about. Because the truth is, we accomplished in Afghanistan, we were accomplishing exactly what we set out to do. It takes a long time. It took a long time. It's really difficult. But what we said when we went there is we want the Afghan people to be able to defend themselves. Well, the vast majority of fighting in Afghanistan is by the Afghan military. The 2,500 troops we had there were for training and advising and some direct counterterrorism action. that was focused on, particularly Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It's the same thing with the war against ISIS, right? We empowered locals with a small footprint to fight ISIS themselves. And yet somehow we were in this eager thing in a peacekeeping operation to leave. So I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm incorrect. But I believe this is going to be an epically tragic, bad mistake. And I'm heartbroken about it. And particularly, let's put that aside. There are still about 10,000 translators left that are waiting to come to the United States that we promised. We must bring them here, or at least bring them to an intermediary place while we process them, or we will never win the local election, the local people to our side again when we inevitably have to go back to war someday. Because all they'll do is look at what happened in Afghanistan and Vietnam and be like, "No, we're not gonna invest in you, America." That's frightening.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time today. Thank you to everyone who watched and who sent in questions. We had some really great ones. I wish we had more time. But Congressman, again, thank you so much for coming to the press club. And hopefully in the near future, we'll actually be able to welcome everyone in person into the building.
You bet. Thank you, guys. Take care.